Hello everyone and welcome back to Getting Started with World Creator 2. I'm Tyler, and in today's episode I'm going to show you how to import a few different terrains from the terrain.party website and how to treat each height map's details, as well as try to add some filters to edit the shape of the existing height map information. So let's just dive right in. First thing we need to do is go to the terrain.party website to get our height maps. And once you're on their website, you will see a little square here. I'm going to zoom in. This square represents the zone that you're going to be exporting your different height map information. I'm going to just zoom out and go to the location that I want our height map. I'm going to go over here to the San Francisco Bay. So this little square dot is our export box. I'm going to drag it over here to the San Francisco Bay. I'm going to zoom in, whoop, too far, and I'm going to place it just about there. So the next thing we need to decide is exactly how big we want our export to be. Right now, the default when you load up the website is 18 kilometers. You can go up all the way as high as, I believe, 60 kilometers by 60 kilometers, which gives you a super large terrain size. But the one that we're going to do is actually the smallest terrain size, and I'll tell you exactly why we want to do that in just a little bit. But the smallest terrain size is actually 8K. So let's just position this exactly where we want. I want the upper part of the bay here, just on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. So right here, what we need to do is go over here to this little cloud button to hit export. You have a few different map views. You have the street map that we have. You have a shadow relief, which shows basically the height map information, but shown up in a shadow detail. And the other one is the topographic imagery, which is quite nice, but I'm just going to switch back open to the street view so I can see a little bit easier. And make sure you hit the export cloud. It's going to ask you exactly what you want this to be called, because that's what it's going to name the zip file. We just name it whatever we want and hit OK. I've already exported this as 8K, so I'm not going to do that here. The next map I'm going to do is I'm going to bump this up to 16K, and then I'm going to use about this square. I'm going to show you exactly what the 16K export looks like in World Creator 2 toward the end of our guide. You will likely see anywhere from 4 to 5 height maps in the zip file, as well as a text file that describes some different details about each one of these height maps. Each one of these height maps is a different terrain quality. So, for example, this one right here, the USGS, is based on a 10-meter LiDAR capture, and this one is based on 30 meters. I believe this one right here is based on 90 meters, and lastly, this one here is based off 900 meters. This text file will explain each one of those, and it will also explain that the merged file here is basically a combination of the 30, the 90, and the 10, and showcases the best combination of all three. In our example today, we're just going to show the most highest precision LiDAR capture, and that is the 10 meter. So what I have here is our height map of the 10-meter capture to the terrain. One thing to keep in mind that no matter which one of the height maps that you choose, and no matter if it's the 8-kilometer, the 16-kilometer, or the 60-kilometer that you export from terrain.party, each and every one of these height maps is going to be a resolution of 1081 by 1081. It will not adjust it based on your terrain size. It'll always export at this set resolution. I'm going to show you a couple different ways how you combat this later on, but the first example I'm going to show you is the unedited version of the 10-meter capture as is, without us doing anything to it prior. And don't worry if you only have a location in the world where it's 30 meters or 90 meters. I will show you each one of those. So for example, this next image, this is based off a 900 meter capture. This one is based off 90 meter capture, which you could see some jagged edges here around the water line. And this one is the merged, which is, as before mentioned, a combination of the 10, 30, and 90. And the last one I have here is the 30 meter, which is probably one of the better options you can pick if you are not in the United States. If you are in the US, you need to just go ahead and stick with this 10 meter one here, as it's going to give you the best results. So let's go ahead and take our 10 meter height map here and bring it into World Creator 2. I'm going to go ahead and set up the base terrain. I want the base terrain to be exactly 8K, which is what our height map is. I'm going to go ahead and edit the curve, and I'm just going to make sure that the entire terrain is flat. We're going to go to Areas, Add Area, set this to Fit Terrain. I'm going to go ahead and pop this resolution to be 1 notch higher than what the resolution of our height map is. So our height map is technically 1081 by 1081, and I want this resolution to be 1 notch higher than the incoming height map. So this is 1024. We just need to pop it to 2048. This is basically going to adjust the resolution that is displayed or that World Creator is generating from the height map. So if you have a 16K true height map, but you only want it to be displayed in World Creator or generated in World Creator as, say, 2K, this is the resolution that you adjust. There are some pros and cons to which way you want to approach this, but that is something to consider in future use. Now we're just going to select Has Height Map. I don't care to see the blend map, and just make sure this is set to all the way 1, and make sure our border blending to the height map is set all the way to 1. And just in case so I don't accidentally move these nodes, we're going to take our area and lock its positioning. Now let's go to File, and once we search for our height map, we are going to just simply select the one that we want, hit Open, and our 10-meter precision height map has been imported into World Creator 2. And of course, by default, the first level step that is always imported in is level step 6. But to help y'all understand easier which step slider or which level step location is the one that you should actually use for the height map input, let's move on to the base tab or the surface tab and the base sub tab, and let's adjust our precision level. So here our precision is set to 1 meter, which means that the actual resolution of the entire terrain, of course, is 8K. Well, as I've said before, the height map image that we imported is actually just 1081 by 1081. So dividing 8000 by 1081, we get around 7.4. So for our 1081 by 1081 height map, that means each pixel in that height map is 7.4 meters by 7.4 meters, as opposed to the 1 meter by 1 meter of the terrain resolution that is set here by the precision level. So let's change the terrain resolution to match as close as possible to the height map's resolution. So since our divided value is 7.4 meters by 7.4 meters, the closest precision level that we can choose is actually 8 meters. So let's go ahead and choose 8 meters. And that puts our terrain resolution at 1000 by 1000. This is okay. It doesn't matter that this is slightly less than what the height map import is. We just want to be as close as possible to what that resolution is. Now let's go back to the Areas tab and open our settings. Then what we want to do is set the level step slider to the max that it can be. What you see here now, the terrain is as close as possible to the real world values of what is imported in the height map now. Well, almost. What we don't have accurate here is the height values or the Z values. This is what's going to be adjusted in our height scale here, but to know exactly what value we need to change this to match the Z-axis of the actual terrain height, we need to go to Google Maps so we can figure out this information. So I have Google Maps here, and I'm going to zoom in just in the location that I want to capture. We need to hit the hamburger menu here, and then select Terrain, and this is going to give us the topographic elevations of our terrain. So as I've done in a previous height map video, we're going to specify or pick a certain peak here to adjust our World Creator 2 terrain on. This peak is pretty high, and I know exactly where that is in the terrain. This is around 920 feet in elevation from practice, so this translates to 280.42 meters. So back in World Creator 2, we need to turn on our observer tools, go to the peak that we wanted to adjust, and it's hard to tell, but this is actually the peak location that we were in Google Maps, and our elevation, as you can see in the top right terrain info, is around 33 meters. So in Google, this peak is 280.42 meters divided by the 32 that we have here. This gives us a value of around 8.76. So on our height scale, we need to adjust this number to be 8.76. And now that we've done this, let's go ahead and check. And it is very close to exactly what we have. It's about 8 meters off, but we could probably adjust this to say 0.5. Figure this out and we can keep dropping this value till we hit a value that we enjoy. And as you can see, this is pretty darn close. We're about half a meter off, but I wouldn't worry too much about being a half a meter or a meter off. This is the best representation that we're going to get to our real world values. Now, at this point, our imported height map is as close to being the actual scale that matches not only the resolution that we imported, but the scale that it is to the real world. From here on, all we have to do now is just decide how we want to adjust the height map's details. If we want to use this height map and add filters to it, then we need to keep the level step slider at 7 or even 6 will be fine, since it gives the generator another level to use, and most of the important information from the height map is still available. This is why the level step and the precision levels that we set here in the beginning dictates exactly the appropriate level step that you need to import the height map as, based on the resolution of the imported height map. So if you're going to add detail to a height map that's already existing, I would set the level step at least one notch below what the actual height map import is that we set, which we've determined is 7. Or I would realistically just uncheck use level step and then customize that yourself, which we will do here in a little bit. Then what we're going to do is go back to our base subtab and then change this precision back to 1. So now the information of the height map that we have is almost identical. But as you remember, we made sure that the level step was either 6 or 7. We'll start off at 7 since 7 was the real import that we had. And now, since we changed the precision to 1, we've added 3 or 4 more levels on top of 7 to give our filters and details information to be generated on. So here we're just going to keep our level step at 7 since that was the correct version, and make sure our precision level is set back to 1. This gives us a terrain size of 8K by 8K. And now we can go and proceed in adding some details. So I'm just going to run through this real quick and see what details we can add to show you exactly what you could do when the height map is imported on the correct level step. So let's go back to base, filters, add a layer, add filters, and let's begin. The first I'm going to add is the ridged filter. Just to give it a little bit of pop, I'm going to adjust the strength down to 80 because I don't want it to be too powerful. Let's go ahead and select our next filter and add erosion fluvial. And I'm going to drop this general strength down to 100 because I don't want it to be overwhelming with our original height map information. And to me, this is just a tad bit too much, so I'm going to drop the depth to 14. Now let's just zoom in just a tad in our area. Okay, since we've added a 1 meter precision level, by default, erosion fluvial will not have the highest strength level set. So let's set this to give extra information on top of our height map. Let's set this to around 60. All right, this is looking pretty good. And one thing to keep in mind is I would actually do this in most cases, especially if you have a height map that produces very straight fluvial lines. These aren't too straight. These should be okay, but these lines here or these lines here, these are pretty good. They're not too straight, but if you're wanting to jag some of this erosion a little bit, I would set the noise to something around 5. And the lower the value here, then the more fine-grained the noise pattern is. So you're able to notice the detail much, much more. If you have the noise set something really, really high, then the only way you're going to notice that noise is if you're really zoomed out and you see the whole landscape as the bigger picture. And as you can see, now the fluvial erosion here has become ever so slightly more jagged. It's these subtle effects that make all the difference. Now let's add an overall smooth filter just so that we could polish some of these effects a little bit. Choose the smooth, and I'm going to go ahead and set this value to be somewhere close to 55 or 60. And now our terrain just has a slight little polish from our details. Next, I want to add a soft erosion just to make the valley pop a little bit. So go back to filters, erosion, and make sure we choose erosion soft. I'm going to go ahead and turn the strength down to 400. And I'm going to set the depth to 75 and adjust our noise to be around 50. Lastly, I'm going to scroll all the way down and make sure our highest level strength slider has some detail to work with. I'm going to set this to probably around 25 and see where we get. And the reason why I want these filters to affect the highest resolution is because since we set our import height map on level 7, we need as much detail on top of that level to work with. In this case, levels 8, 9, and 10 are providing all of the detail generated by the filters. Now this looks pretty good. If we zoom around here, we can see that our erosion is taking place nicely. There's no too many straight lines. And remember, this is all on a level strength 7, which we haven't lost any of the imported height map information. But now let's go ahead and take a look at what if we dropped the level step strength from 7 to 6 and see what kind of information that we can produce. I'm going to go back to our areas. And now I'm going to drop from 7 to 6. This to me looks a lot better than before, but we can enhance this further by adding pieces of the original height map back. To do this, we need to uncheck Use Level Step. And since before, whenever we had the level step set to 6, all we have to do now is make sure the level strength step 6 here is all the way to the max. Let's just put it at about 98 and then make sure level step 5 is 100%. That way about 2% of it could be allocated to step level 5. Now I want to add some detail all the way from 6 even to 8, but at a slight slant here. Actually, let's just drop this to be about 90. And then let's set the step level 7, which remember was the actual imported level step that it needed to be about half, so that at least half of our information is being reproduced. And come to think of it, we don't even really need to affect level steps 8, 9, or 10 because the actual imported level that it needed to be for the height map was 7 that we determined at the very beginning. So don't affect any of the level strength steps that were above what the requirement needed. Just only affect the 2 or 3 that affects the actual height map import. And our generation has finished, which only took a few minutes. And to me, with customizing our level strength steps and making sure that all of our filters were based on the appropriate precision level, this to me looks like it's got the best results so far for our 1081 by 1081 import. Even here, the erosion pops up just nicely. There's a little bit of blop there, but we could fix that. And the peaks aren't too sharp. The fluvial isn't popping too hard. We've smoothed that out a bit. Even let's zoom around here. Even the coastline, which the coastline had these very jagged, sharp, squared off ridges, and now they look more like actual cliff edges or actual boulders popping up out of the water, which if we wanted to go ahead and set that up, let's go to Scene, Ocean, turn on our ocean, and make sure since the lower level here is set at an elevation of 0, which to terrain.party is technically sea level, let's just make sure our ocean height here is 1 notch higher than what the lower base is. And here we have a very close representation of the San Francisco Bay Area. Of course, the north part of San Francisco. Now, another thing that we could do to slightly enhance this a bit is go back to our area tab and then this resolution slider. Now, as mentioned before, we want this resolution to be as close to the imported height map, but you can increase this if you want. Doing this will ultimately take the resolution of your height map and basically increase or decrease the implementation of that resolution on your terrain. So since we have an imported height map of 1081 by 1081, if we increase this to say 4K, then the 1081 by 1081 is being interpolated as a 4K image onto the terrain. Now, this does help increase some of the detail on the terrain because the filters are generating based on more pixels as opposed to the lower resolution we started editing with. However, I wouldn't go beyond 4 times the resolution of your imported height map. The reason is the higher you go, the more performance heavy your generation is going to have to be. The other reason in this case, with our imported height map being only 1081 by 1081, the difference in detail between the 4K area resolution and the 8K area resolution is almost negligible. So having the area resolution a max of 4 times the imported height map resolution is my recommendation for getting the best results, but your mileage may vary. That being said, let's now look at the imported height map as a higher resolution to begin with. As great as this resolution slider is, it is always best to import the highest resolution you can and then downsize it here or just import the native size. Let's now take our 1081 by 1081 height map and edit it to be a clean 2K by 2K. 2K as in 2000 by 2000, not 2048 by 2048. The reason why I want it to be 2000 by 2000 as opposed to 2048 by 2048 is so I can line up the precision levels under our base tab to be exactly what the imported height map is. It is okay to have 2048 or higher as long as you know the real world scale. So I brought our 1081 by 1081 image here into Photoshop. So what we want to do is go ahead and just increase the resolution of this terrain to fit exactly 2K. So we're going to go to Image, Image Size, not Canvas Size, Image Size. Make sure our link is selected, select Pixels, and we will change this to 2000 pixels. And now it has basically increased our resolution. Now, the big benefit to this is not so much to make sure that the imported height map is accurately depicted as 2K or 4K or 8K or etc. When you increase the resolution of a lower height map, it's basically having to add additional pixels in there that weren't there before. So Photoshop is going to do its best to add that pixel in there based on the average gray to gray values from the original pixel to the left, basically, and the original pixel on the right, and as well as a pixel above and a pixel below. So it's going to take a cluster of the original pixels and then generate a new pixel in between those that is an average value between the two. Now, to help Photoshop render this better, what you could do is go to Filter. You can go down to Blur, add some Gaussian blur, and then what I would do is add a radius of 1 to 2 pixels. That way you can blend in the original pixels with the new pixels a little bit better so that it gives the gradient a much more smooth effect. And the best results that I have come out is to make sure that this radius here, as I've said, is only 1 to 2 pixels, but make sure it's per double the expansion. So if you are expanding to 2K, say make the radius just 1. If you're expanding to 4K, make the radius 2. Or if you're expanding to 8K, make the radius 4. Doing this, in my experience, gives the best results of the blurred effect from the gray to gray values. Another thing that you could do is you could soften up the coastline a bit. If you remember the original height map that we had, the coastline is a little bit sharp. So if you wanted to use one less filter in World Creator, as in take the smooth filter and apply that smooth filter based on the coastline, if you want to eliminate the process of applying that filter in World Creator 2, you could use the Gaussian blur again and set the pixel selection to be pure black. Then you can set the edging around all of the higher values to be blurred much more smoothly with the pure black dark value we have here at the sea level. And as you can see, I've already gone ahead and done an unedited version of the 2K by 2K, which is basically just increasing the pixel size. I've also done a 2K by 2K edited version, which is the 2K plus the Gaussian blur. I have done a 4K version that has gotten no Gaussian blur added, and of course I've done another 4K version with Gaussian blur added, and I'm going to show you exactly how each one is affecting the terrain. Here are my different export images from Photoshop. I have even gone through and taken the 2K unedited one that I have selected here and then change the grayscale of it in Photoshop from 16-bit to 32-bit. 32-bit isn't necessary, but it can, in some cases, help make a pixelated 16-bit image more smooth if you don't want to add any Gaussian blur. Now, if we take each of our height maps and bring them into World Creator 2 and replace the existing imported height map by simply selecting File under the height map properties, we search for our image and we just have to select it and it replaces it. But for each one of these images, before I do this, I'm going to turn the filters off so we can just see what the base image produces on import. And I'm going to make sure that our level step is set back to 7. That way we can get the closest representation between all of the images. So here we have our base image of the 1081 by 1081 without the filters. The next image is the 2K image that has no Gaussian blur. So if we scroll back, you can see right along the coastline here, there is a slight difference in resolution, and you might notice just a tad bit of detail has been added here whenever we increase to the 2K. Now the 2K edited version next is giving it some Gaussian blur. You don't see much detail change here in the overall height map, but the biggest noticeable change is how it smooths out the coastline. Let's go back to the unedited version. It's very sharp, very, very brutal. And then go back with it with 1 pixel Gaussian blur, and you can see it has tidied up a little bit. Same thing when we go to the 4K unedited version, or no blur effect, how sharp this is, but the detail here in the terrain has increased ever so slightly. Let's go back and just so you can see the difference. You can see the sharpness in this pop just a little bit. And the final image here is the 4K with the Gaussian blur effect. And it's basically just like the 2K, but gives our overall terrain here a few more pixels to work with. And lastly here, if I scroll to the next one, this is the 2K unedited version as a 32-bit file. As you can see, the 32-bit has already done a significant amount of gray to gray change. If we go to the 4K version here, you can see how drastic the cliff at top here is with the sea floor. And in the 32-bit, it has minimized that significantly. Now let's look at the difference each height map makes on the terrain with the filters on and with the level steps adjusted to our custom level strength step sliders that we had previously. And here I'm going to run through real quick just some of the before and after shots of the base to the filtered version of each height map. And next, let's go ahead and bring our 32-bit image in there. But remember, it's a 2K image, so what we need to do here to set this up, select our 32-bit, make sure our width is set to 2000 and our height is set to 2000. We need to make sure the Y is flipped, and this is a 32-bit float. Go ahead and import. Now, the 32-bit is going to significantly decrease your height scale, so you're going to have to either double or rescale your height map entirely. I found that here in this case, a value of 19.7 works best in my case. Also, I had to check the use level step in this case for the 32-bit because as of right now, the 32-bit float only imports correctly if you have this checked. So this to me is the best looking version of our edited real world terrain. The 32-bit 2K unedited or un-Gaussian blurred height map version that we have imported into World Creator 2. Here we have a nice clean coastline. All the filters have produced effects quite nicely, and all the mountains are sharp but not overpowering. This to me is the best looking version that I could come up with in just a short period of time. You can go on and on and on and add more detail as you see fit, but for the purposes of this tutorial, this is as far as I'm going to take the effects and details. Now, what if we are in part of the world that isn't the United States and doesn't have 10-meter height map precision or 10-meter LiDAR? Well, most parts of the world have at least 30 or 90. 30 meters will produce very similar results as 10 meters, but you may want to increase some of the effects a little bit higher. For example, here is the terrain using the 30-meter LiDAR height map that we have imported. Granted, in this case, I would definitely add a smooth filter based on the ocean level to get rid of a bunch of this rocky blotchiness. and increase some of the fluvial and erosion effects to pop up through here, but overall, it's not bad. You can definitely work with it. And here is the 90-meter capture of the height map. Again, this coastline is almost terrible, but you could sculpt this out, smooth it a little bit, increase some of the effects inside of the gaps here. But overall, again, not terrible. This coastline is definitely workable, so I would just give it a shot if that's all that you have. At least you know that all the information inside the inland part is okay and more than likely really easy to work with. It's just when you have the coastline effects like this that you have to adjust a little bit to be more homemade or figured out to make sure it doesn't look like you've created a real world connected to Minecraft. Now here we have the 900 meter, which is almost removes all of the height map information from the original. The best thing that you can do for something that has 900 meter capture is to change the use level step to something around, let's say 4, which produces a lot more nice results and more detail that you can work with. It won't be near the real world 1-to-1 scale, but it's going to give you a general shape. And with enough adjusting, you can result in some really nice looks, whether that would be mountains, rolling hills, deserts, dunes, islands, you name it. All can be achieved with any height map, including the 900 meter one. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve and which LiDAR meter is required for your effect. Last but not least, I'm going to just want to quickly show you how the 16K version of our area looks like with our height map levels and our filters. And here we have the San Francisco Bay Area with 16K map size. You can see before this little area right here was our 8K, and I have gone through and imported the entire large 16K that we exported earlier. One thing to consider here is you just have to make sure that your terrain width and terrain lengths are set to 16K. In this case, I had to set the precision level to 2 because there's a bug right now for precision level 1 for a 16K map. But all of the settings, all the filters are identically the same. So if we zoom in here, we can see that this is taking very similar results, not entirely the same, but very similar results, because as before, this 16K is technically 1081 by 1081. But that's okay, we're just giving it a good representation. There are many other sources of height map, satellite, or LiDAR information. All are achieved in World Creator 2 in a similar way. If you have a way or source you want me to investigate and showcase, please let me know in the comments or the World Creator 2 Discord channel, and I'll be sure to try and cover it. Thank you for joining me in this part 3 of the Height Maps mini-series. I'll see you in the next one.